Welcome to another SIGcast installment where I will attempt to guide you through the curricular waters of what is AP European history. In this episode, we're going to continue our journey through the 18th century, where we have been studying absolutism all the way through the balance of power, those particular themes. And in this case, we're going to see them combined and at times contradict the thought-provoking era of enlightenment. We will also discuss in this presentation the culmination of the theories of mercantilism and absolutism in the Clash of Empires. So the background of the Clash of Empires, which essentially is the big world war that we should know about on the AP exam, the 7 Years' War, which lasted 7 years, just saying. We got to go into the background behind it, and we're going to do so in talking a little bit about the ruler of Austria, Maria Theresa, and that would have been 1740 to 1780. And, following the Siege of Vienna before Maria Theresa in 1683, the weakened Ottoman Empire would slowly be worn down and chased out of Europe for over the next 150 years. Because of the disintegration of this empire, a lot of historians commonly refer to the Ottoman Empire as the old sick man of Europe. So at the expense of the Ottoman Empire, what we have is a confrontation and some competition. And what we'll see is the empires of Russia and Austria will grow substantially, thus stimulating wealth and power in both empires. And again, they're going to expand where the Ottoman Empire used to rule. Okay, so they're going to add to their domains. Poland, just subsequently, and I keep always giving a shout out to Poland, but Poland couldn't participate in the demise of the Ottoman Empire because of their lack of centralization. And ironically, they became a pawn in the tensions between Russia, Austria, and Prussia expansion. And again, we've talked about this, but there will be 3 partitions of Poland. And by the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, there will no longer be a Poland. If you're Polish, you live in part of Austria, Russia, or Prussia. So one such ruler who benefited from the decline of the Ottoman Empire, obviously, was Austrian Maria Theresa. And she was the first and only female Habsburg monarch. Her status as female empress was a controversial topic. If you remember, I instructed you on something called the Pragmatic Sanction, where Maria Theresa's father, Charles, made a lot of the rulers of Europe agree to recognize her as a legit ruler. That was called a Pragmatic Sanction. And so this controversy is actually going to lead to a war that I'll talk about here in a second. But Maria, when she became queen or empress, helped to reform the Austrian army, further aiding her quest against the Ottomans. While unsuccessful versus other European powers, we'll talk about this in the War of Austrian succession, Austria would successfully bring Hungary and the Slavic states back into Europe. And again, they'll take back Hungary and the Slavic states from the Ottomans as they disintegrate. Next, in the background of the 7 Years' War, we have already been talking about the emergence of the Prussian state. And following the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the princes and provinces of the Holy Roman Empire gained more political and religious freedom. And, if you think about it, we've been talking about this going all the way back to Frederick William the Great Elector, but this growing sense of independence among the racially and culturally diverse former provinces of the Holy Roman Empire caused many provinces to act as their own individual sovereign states. So, again, examples of this, the Austrian Habsburgs were concerned in centralizing and dealing with the Ottomans in Austria, which was again once part of the Holy Roman Empire, and people like Frederick William the Great Elector, Frederick I, and Frederick William I started centralizing their power in their domains, forming their own new nation state, which would emerge as Prussia. So the best example of such a state is probably Prussia because of the economic, political, and military reforms of all the Hohenzollerns, which is the family line of the Prussian monarchs, but also the military reforms continuing with Frederick the Great, really, again known as Frederick II, really increased the power and prestige of Prussia. Prussia's rise to power can best be shown in 1740, when, as I mentioned earlier, Frederick II refused to recognize Maria Theresa as a legit empress and invaded Austrian territory. And again, I told you about the pragmatic sanction and all that other stuff. Frederick ignores this and basically picks on a female. This war was known as the War of Austrian Succession. It was a 9-year conflict won by Prussia, thus establishing their place as a legitimate independent European state. They also gained the territory of Silesia. So if you look here, this is the territory south of Prussia, known as Silesia. They took that from the Austrian Empire. So there was an uneasy peace. As I said, that ended in 1748. There's an uneasy peace for about 8 years that held. There's tension. People know that Austria wants Silesia back. Prussia's determined, and Frederick the Great's determined to hold on to Silesia. So this is going to create tension that isn't going to go away. And, everybody can kind of feel the tension in the air. And ironically, hostilities that emerged into the 7 Years' War actually start in North America, of all places, not even in Europe. And British troops, which included a young George Washington, were assigned with trying to take a French fort in the Ohio Valley. And again, that fort was at Fort Duquesne, which is at the forks of the Ohio and the Allegheny, which forms the Ohio River. And yes, I'm talking about present-day Pittsburgh. And if you go to Keystone Oaks, you should know this because, well, you're in Pittsburgh. But the French and Indian War started in our backyard. The whole thing with Jumonville and or Jumonville, if you were from this region, and Fort Necessity. This is where hostilities erupt. And it didn't go well for the British initially. They were pushed back by July of 1755. Some of you guys know the legend of Braddock's defeat, and this is more of kind of an A-push lesson. But if you guys go to Kennywood Park, there's a statue of George Washington in the middle of the park, and a lot of people that live here don't realize that not far from Kennywood was one of the most famous incidents in George Washington's life, and also the 7 Years' War, and that, of course, is the ambush of Braddock, or otherwise known as Braddock's defeat, right across the river. So, anyway, George Washington caused the French and Indian War, and this led to eventually the 7 Years' War in 1756. When hostilities break out in North America, England decides to seek protection from the French in the Old World too, as opposed to the New World. They get Prussia to guarantee the neutrality of Hanover, an area vulnerable to invasion by the French. It's also where King George's of England are from. And in return, they will support Prussia, not with really any troops, but with money, large sums of cash. Now, since England has made this sort of alliance with Prussia in the Old World, France decides to do something else. It provokes Austria and France to form an alliance. Now, if you think about that, this is a revolution of sorts, a reversal of alliances, or something called the diplomatic revolution, because if you remember, all throughout this year, Austria and France had been sworn enemies, whether it's back to the Habsburg-Valois War, Richelieu aiding Sweden in the 30 Years' War against Austrian Habsburgs, or the War of the League of Augsburg, 9 Years' War, the War of Spanish Succession. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a shift. Why? Because Austria and France see the need to counter this Old World alliance of England and Prussia. So, again, with this alliance, Austria thinks it's a pretty good opportunity to regain Silesia and actually conquer Prussia once and for all and divide its territories among the winners of France and, of course, Austria. So, to meet this demand, Maria Theresa aligns with Austria, Russia, and France. Emboldened by their success in the War of Austrian Succession, Prussia looked to take even more territory than Silesia from its former rulers in Austria. Much to the surprise of Russia, however, France and Russia came, as we said, to the aid of Austria, and the tiny German state really initially seemed doomed. It didn't go well. There were a few brilliant battles by Frederick the Great as he started the war in Bohemia. Imagine that, another war starting in Bohemia. He then invaded Saxony. But, one of the things that happens here is Russia joins on the side of France because they're concerned that Prussia may expand eastward against them. You think about this, a lot of these tensions are going to continue and be causes of the first modern war, and again, after industrialization, the First World War. And some of you guys are probably thinking about that right now. Like, wow, Russia not like in Germany or France trying to get German territory, Germany wanting to get back at France. Yeah, a lot of that stuff didn't come out of nowhere. But when you learn it from the U.S. history's perspective, it's kind of just like, why? What is going on? Why can't these European countries get along? Well, you know what? They really never have truly gotten along. So with a little luck and some serious aid from Britain, who hoped to reduce the power of France and the balance of power, tiny Prussia would emerge victorious in the end of the 7 Years' War. And luck really was on Prussia's side, and we've already talked about this with the emergence of Catherine the Great in Russia, because Prussia really barely won for three reasons. Britain's entry into the conflict provided much-needed aid and distracted the French, so that was a plus for the Prussians. France decided to spend a lot of their time and effort into the North American conflict, and Frederick the Great turned out to actually be a brilliant military mind. But probably the most important reason why Prussia will emerge victorious is Peter III of Russia would actually, despite taking territory in Prussia and on the verge of Russians defeating the Germans, just totally decided when he became the Tsar to surrender, to make a truce, to make a peace. And this is one of the reasons why the Russian military will call for his death and elevate Catherine, his wife, who they hate each other, to Tsarina. But again, we talked about this story before, but Prussia and Frederick were on the ropes, and all of a sudden, boom, Peter III just basically makes truce and says, all right, we don't want to fight you anymore. So a little bit of luck. So this kind of gives you an idea of where the where the war was fought: in India, in North America, obviously in the Old World. So truly a global or world war. There's no doubt about that. So 7 Years' War and World War I kind of made some references to this. While the victorious Prussia certainly cemented itself as a major power, the real impact of the war came outside Europe and North America and India. The British, not actually caring about Prussia, were really seeking an opportunity to maintain the balance of power and grow abroad at the expense of France. The British were able to exploit their naval advantage against the French to quickly attack and blockade nearly all of the French colonies. While the French were superior on land, they were essentially trapped by this British Navy. Starved of income and supplies, the French were forced to withdraw against Prussia and give most of their colonies in Canada and India to the British. The Treaty of Paris is something that you need to know here too. In 1763, it was the most important treaty of the 18th century and most important treaty since the Treaty of Westphalia, because Prussia was permanently solidified as a powerful nation state, and it gained once and for all Silesia. And Britain will gain more territory in India at the expense of France, and France will lose all of its colonies in North America to Great Britain. It also should be noted that this was a bloody war, the bloodiest since the 30 Years' War, and again, it was a world war at that. So the impact, again, just to review, it solidified Prussia as a major Eastern European power. It vastly expanded the British Empire, making Britain the most powerful nation in Europe and the world. And it established sole control of the British East India Company in India, which would later control all of India. And it demonstrated the importance of having a strong navy. And it forced French Quebec into British Canada and put an economic and military strain on the British colonies in North America, because of the French and Indian War, which will actually be one of the causing factors of them taxing the American colonists, which will lead to the American colonists' demand for independence. So as you can see, as of 1763, this is what the British Empire looks like, and it was a result of a commercial enterprise and Britain's military successes. Thus, the old saying, and this is going to continue to grow, but the sun never sets on the British Empire. So thanks for listening to this episode of Clash of the Empires. Make sure you take your notes, and again, hopefully at this point you've taken your Ed Puzzle quiz. Have a great one, guys. Thanks for tuning in.